Well, here's the latest news from outer space. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. It's pretty spacey, boys. Former astronaut, or I should say retired astronaut, Scott Kelly sent a message out on Twitter, apparently expressing his view on the Kavanaugh confirmation and kind of taking a gentle jab at President Trump. And here's what he sent out initially. And this is from Scott Kelly's tweet. One of the greatest leaders of modern times, Sir Winston Churchill, said, quote, "In victory, magnanimity." I guess those days are over. So that was his original tweet. And you would think that there would have been a firestorm on the right of people saying, hey, suck it up. Your guy lost. Your people lost. Our guy won. But no, in fact, the attack came from the left. And after a little while, Scott Kelly was forced to issue this tweet. Did not mean to offend by quoting Churchill. My apologies. I will go and educate myself further on his atrocities, racist views, which I do not support. My point was, we need to come together as one nation. We're all Americans, and that should transcend partisan politics. Stephen Green, is it possible that the left cannot even bear the left?
Oh, that was beautifully phrased. No, they can't stand each other. They know they're awful people.
Have you met them?
Exactly.
Of course they can't stand.
Listen, normally nothing turns me on more than a little blue-on-blue action, but this one really pissed me off. I saw this, I think, first thing this morning, and just a combination of anger and heartbrokenness. Number one, that a man with the mental acuity and physical courage to be an astronaut would back down to the Twitter mob like this is just disheartening. It's dispiriting. And then anger at the real issue here. It's not Churchill's racism. Practically everybody was a racist back then. It's sad, but it's true. I won't give you the whole lecture on that, but the real reason the left hates Churchill so much that they had to shut down one of America's premier former astronauts is this. Winston Churchill saved Western civilization, and the left will never forgive him for that.
That's right.
Never. Had it not been for his warnings and thus Britain's admittedly late preparations for World War II, the Battle of Britain would have been lost. Britain would have been lost. Had he done what everybody told him to do after the fall of France in June of 1940 and negotiated a peace with Hitler, Hitler would have beaten the Soviets, and that would have been the end of Europe. This country could not have stayed the same if Hitler ruled everything from the Pyrenees to the Ural Mountains. This country would have been tainted by that. This explosion of wealth and trade we've enjoyed since World War II never would have happened. We would have been this heavily militarized society trying to protect ourselves from the Nazi threat. Everything we built, all of these wonderful, amazing institutions, this explosion of wealth and liberty around the world would not have happened were it not for one man standing across the channel from Adolf Hitler and saying, "No, I will not negotiate with you." Winston Churchill saved Western civilization, and for that the left damns him. Well, damn them too.
Bill Whittle, I know that you're quite the student of Churchill, as clearly Stephen Green is as well. In victory, magnanimity. It's a benign phrase. It's actually kind of a gentlemanly thing to say. And have we gotten to the point in our civilization where historical figures must be vetted before being partially quoted? Has it gotten to that point where you can't say anything said by a former, short of Jesus Christ himself, and I'm sure that they'd have some objections to him.
You think?
How can a society go forward when it's unable to draw upon the wisdom of the past because it's ashamed of the other acts of those historical figures?
Well, first of all, let me say, if you ever hear a progressive quoting Jesus Christ, his skin will burst into flames. So that's not going to happen. It's not everything that Steve said is true in terms of Churchill's past, and it's also true that he was a racist. But this bears on it to some degree. It wasn't like his entire life was about racist activities. He was trying to save the world from the whitest people on the planet, So while the Nazis are murdering every single person of color, they're ready to murder anybody who's not white. Winston Churchill stood up and stopped the whitest people on the planet. So there's that. But that doesn't matter to these people. The real reason they hate Churchill, I think, is twofold. First of all, he's a historical figure, which means that individuals can change history, which is clearly the case, and that the world is not an endless wind-up toy that is moving towards this inevitable socialist paradise, one grinding year at a time. So that just the fact that he's an individual and an individualist, plus the whole Western civilization thing is a big part of it. But I think fundamentally the reason they despised Churchill so much was because Churchill had tremendous courage, he had physical courage, and he had moral courage. And courage is kryptonite to the left because their entire weapon against us is our own lack of moral courage, not our lack of physical courage. We're not afraid of these guys coming down the street with guns. We're not too worried about that. We're desperately worried about having our lives destroyed by them the way that Brett Kavanaugh's life was destroyed by them. We don't have, for very, very many of us, we do not have the moral courage to withstand that and to understand what seems unbelievably, the reverse of what you would think. Moral courage is much tougher than physical courage. It's a much harder burden to carry, and it's much rarer. I'll give you the example that Mark Twain gave during the Spanish-American War in the Battle of Manila Bay. The U.S. Navy basically destroyed the Spanish Navy. I think we suffered one casualty due to a heart attack from a guy shoveling coal. I really think that's what we did. But during this engagement, there was a situation where a number of American sailors were trapped kind of out in the open under fire, and the commander of a battleship said, "We've got to get a boat out there and get these guys off of this boat, and we're looking for volunteers." And it turned out that every single sailor on the ship volunteered, every single one of them. And that turned into something that we were very proud of and putting in all the newspapers and crowing about and all the rest of it. Twain said, "Impressive, it is. It's a good thing. That's physical courage." He said, "But what if, in order to get those men off of the boat, what if those 7 or 10 volunteers, instead of being under fire, what if when they came back they were branded as traitors to the United States for the rest of their lives? What if that was the price of getting the guys off the boat? What if the act of getting them off the boat entailed a maneuver where you would be considered active traitors to the United States, and you would have to come home and live among your peers with everybody calling you a traitor or a deserter or a mutineer? Would you volunteer to save them then?" And I think the answer is no. And I think the answer for almost all of us is no. So, for those of us with character anyway, or who would attempt to have one. So what that's telling you is that there are things that are more terrifying to people of integrity than dying. There are things that are much more terrifying. And being considered to be a traitor or a dishonorable person or any kind of let's just say a gang rapist or something like that. It's insurmountable pressure. And that's why he buckled. But aside from the whole thing about the left eating itself, I have to say that his wording was the most menial, the most degrading, humiliating, kind of dog licking its own vomit kind of response. "I'm terribly sorry that I quoted, Churchill. Terribly sorry that I quoted Churchill. I will go to the re-education camp and begin immediate self-criticism meetings, and perhaps over the years of religious dedication to changing my horrible, evil, capitalist bourgeois ways, maybe the people will be able to forgive me after I do my 15 years in the gulag and I've gone through the re-education camp and all the rest of this kind of, oh no, I deserved it." That's what it was, right? It wasn't like a, hey, it wasn't like a, hey, I'm just quoting the guy for leadership. It's like, oh, I hadn't realized what a horrible, horrible person he was and what a horrible, horrible man I am. And I can't be, just brand me now and drag me through the streets so that I can prove my double plus good thoughts about Big Brother to, everybody before they shoot me in the head.
Yeah, Bill,
And
you just made me think of if I can just throw in something really quick, Scott, you reminded me of Doug from the Pixar movie Up, except he's a reverse Doug. I do so like the cone of shame.
He does need re-education, and the reason he needs the re-education is apparently he has no education on that matter. When it comes down to it, not only does he not understand who Winston Churchill was, but he probably doesn't understand anything about who anybody was before his generation. I'm not saying the guy's a numbskull. I mean, obviously he's a frickin' astronaut, So, I mean, the guy, he's probably a scientist or engineer. He knows some stuff. But I can just see him there, sitting there with his Twitter app in one hand and his Bartlett's Familiar Quotations Volume 7 in the other hand, looking for something that he can say to sort of subtly attack President Trump. And I thought it's interesting as he thumbed his way through Bartlett's that he found a quote from Winston Churchill, had to go back pretty far. It's interesting that he didn't find any quotes from, let's say, Barack Obama about how to behave in a magnanimous way in victory. He didn't find any quotes from Hillary Clinton. He found no quotes from Bill Clinton. He found no quotes from John Kerry or Walter Mondale or any number of Jimmy Carter, any number of these people. He had to go all the way back to the 1940s to find a quote that he could use to illustrate his point. It's because there's nobody left in your party like that. And you have to go back so far that you live in a racist time where people still thought colonialism was a nice thing to do for those poor, pathetic Indian people. And that is, I think, the thrust of this for me is his own ignorance. And then, as Bill said, his quizzling, whimpering shame at having to apologize for quoting. If he had half of the cojones that you would expect from the average astronaut, he would have said, lighten up, people. I was talking about leadership and I was saying something about President Trump. I wasn't going back and doing an exhaustive study of the life and sins of Winston Churchill. I mean, I know it's just a tweet, people. I know. And I know
it's self-abasement. It was horrible.
You just let it go. But it's just phenomenal to me that somebody who has literally the world on a string. I mean, the guy who has looked at the Earth from space still is so shallow that he not only doesn't know anything about Winston Churchill and quotes him sort of in a profligate manner, but then has to apologize for it later because he had no idea that Winston Churchill was a man of his own times.
He had no idea what camp he joined.
Exactly. He may not know what team he's on right now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we are dealing with in our attempts to promote civic dialogue. This is what we're dealing with when we go head-to-head in public debate with people in our legislatures around the country, as well as in social media and face-to-face. We are dealing with a lot of people who believe that it is wrong to use anything from history. History has been completely deconstructed. The statues have been toppled, the documents have been torn, and we are left waking up in a brand new world every day and wondering what that shiny orange spot in the sky is. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Opp. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.